The sun hung low over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and crimson as the day in the small frontier settlement began to fade into night. The settlement was not more than a scattering of rough wooden cabins, barns, and dirt roads, surrounded by thick woods and wild plains that seemed endless and intimidating. In one of those cabins lived a frail little girl named Alara. She was tiny for her age, her limbs thin and fragile, her face pale yet brightened by the spark of determination in her large blue eyes. Life had never been kind to her. She had lost her parents at a young age and was left in the care of an aging aunt who struggled to provide even the simplest meals. Yet despite hunger, poverty, and loneliness, Alara carried within her a rare gift, a heart that refused to turn cold, a compassion so deep that even the adults of the settlement sometimes paused and wondered at her courage. On that particular evening, Alara was returning from the woods, where she had gone to collect firewood. Though her arms were weak, she insisted on helping her aunt, carrying back twigs and small branches in a bundle tied with rope. The woods had grown dark, and most children would have been frightened by the rustling of leaves or the faraway howls of coyotes, but Alara pressed on, humming softly to herself to keep fear away. She was almost home when she noticed something unusual at the edge of the path. At first, she thought it was a wounded animal, for there was a faint whimper, but when she stepped closer, her eyes widened in shock. There, lying beneath the shadow of an oak tree, was a child, no older than herself, his skin tanned with the deep bronze of the native tribes, his long black hair tangled and dusty, his leg bent awkwardly as though broken or sprained. His clothes were torn buckskin, and there was dried blood on his ankle. He looked exhausted, in pain, and terrified. When Alara's footsteps drew near, his dark eyes flashed open, and he tried to drag himself away, muttering in his language words she could not understand, words full of fear and distrust. Alara froze. In the settlement, the people often whispered warnings about the native tribes that roamed the forests. They were called savages, enemies, dangerous people who raided farms and fought settlers. The adults told stories of attacks, fires, and scalps taken as trophies. Children were warned never to wander alone or trust anyone who wore feathers and paint. Yet, looking down at this boy, Alara did not see an enemy. She saw only a child like herself, frightened and suffering. Her small heart ached with empathy. "Don't be afraid," she whispered softly, kneeling by his side. The boy's chest rose and fell rapidly. He seemed ready to defend himself, though his body had no strength left. Slowly, Alara set down her bundle of wood and reached for the leather water pouch she carried. She took a sip herself, then held it out to him. The boy hesitated, his eyes narrowing with suspicion, but thirst overpowered fear. He snatched the pouch and drank greedily, coughing as the cool water slid down his parched throat. When he was finished, Alara smiled. "It's okay. You're safe with me." The boy did not understand all her words, but he recognized the kindness in her tone. Still, he grimaced and pointed at his ankle. Alara leaned forward and examined it. The joint was swollen and bruised, badly twisted. She knew enough from watching her aunt treat livestock that the boy would not be able to walk far without help. Alara chewed her lip nervously. If the settlers found out she was helping a native child, they might be furious. They might even punish her aunt for it. But how could she abandon him here? The wolves would come at night, or he would simply die from weakness and hunger. The thought filled her with dread. Taking a deep breath, she slid her small shoulder beneath his arm and tried to help him up. He was heavier than she expected, but the boy understood what she meant to do, and with effort, he leaned on her. Together, staggering and stumbling, they made their way toward her cabin. The journey was painfully slow. Alara's arms burned with the strain of supporting him, and more than once they nearly fell. But inch by inch, step by step, they drew closer. When they reached the back of the cabin, Alara guided him to the shed where her aunt stored hay. She decided it would be safer to hide him there than bring him inside immediately. Her aunt, though kind, was deeply fearful of trouble, and Alara feared she might turn the boy away. So, with trembling hands, she arranged some hay for him to lie on, gave him a crust of bread she had saved from dinner, and whispered, "Stay here. I'll take care of you." The boy, though exhausted, managed a faint nod. His eyes, once full of fear, now softened with a glimmer of gratitude. He whispered a word in his language, Ahioka, perhaps his name. Alara repeated it awkwardly, making him smile faintly before his eyes closed in sleep. That night, Alara lay awake, listening to every creak of the old cabin and the distant calls of the night creatures. Her heart pounded with fear of being discovered, yet stronger than fear was the warmth of knowing she had done something good, something right. In her dreams, she saw the boy smiling at her, not as a stranger but as a friend. The next morning, she rose early to check on him. The swelling in his ankle had worsened, but she tried to soothe it by soaking a cloth in cold water from the well and wrapping it around his foot. She brought him porridge, which he ate slowly, his eyes never leaving her face. Though their words were few, they began to understand each other through gestures, smiles, and simple trust. Alara thought she had done well to keep the secret. No one in the village suspected anything as she went about her chores. Her aunt scolded her for being slow, but Alara bore it patiently, her mind always returning to the shed where her hidden friend rested. She promised herself she would nurse him back to health before helping him return to his people. But fate, as it often does, had other plans. On the following day, just as the sun was rising, the sound of hooves thundered across the dirt road outside their cabin. The ground seemed to shake beneath the weight of many riders. Alara rushed to the window, her breath catching in her throat. Her eyes widened in disbelief. 40 native warriors, painted in bright colors of war, feathers streaming from their hair, their eyes sharp and filled with power, were riding straight toward the cabin. Spears and bows gleamed in their hands, and their horses snorted and pawed the ground as they came to a halt before her door. The settlement had always feared such a sight, but never in Alara's wildest dreams had she thought it would be her home they approached. Her aunt screamed in terror and fell to her knees, whispering prayers. Alara, trembling, looked toward the shed where Ahioka hid. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She understood instantly why they had come. The boy she had helped was not just a wandering child, he was one of their own, perhaps the son of a chief or a warrior. And now, his people had come for him. The leader of the warriors dismounted, his tall frame towering, his face painted in red streaks of authority. He stepped toward the door and knocked, not with politeness, but with a force that made the wood rattle. Alara froze, torn between fear and the desperate need to protect her secret. She knew the truth would soon come out, but she also knew one thing for certain. Whatever happened next, her life would never be the same again. The knock on the cabin door echoed like thunder in Alara's ears, each heavy thud rattling her fragile courage. Her aunt clutched her rosary and wept, too terrified even to rise from her knees, and the air seemed thick with dread. Alara's own breath caught in her chest, yet beneath her fear something else burned, an instinct to shield the boy she had found, the boy who now rested in the shed, helpless and unaware that his people had arrived in such fearsome numbers. Gathering her trembling hands into fists, she swallowed her terror and opened the door. The morning light streamed across the threshold, illuminating the warriors who stood outside in all their formidable power. Their painted faces were unreadable masks of strength, and the silence of their horses pressing into the earth was louder than any sound Alara had ever heard. At their head stood the man she had seen first, the one with streaks of red across his cheeks, his long braids swaying as the wind touched them. His eyes were sharp, and when they fell upon the tiny, fragile girl who had dared to open the door, they softened only by the smallest measure. He spoke in his language, a voice like stone and thunder, and though Alara could not understand his words, she sensed the question in them, "Where is the boy?" Her mouth went dry, her body quivering, but her heart knew the answer. She thought of Ahioka lying on the hay, his ankle swollen, his eyes trusting her, his small smile when she spoke his name. She could not betray that trust, not even to his own people, not until she understood what they would do to him. So, with courage that surprised even herself, she shook her head slowly. "I don't know what you mean," she whispered, though she knew he could not understand. The warrior's dark eyes narrowed, and he raised his hand. Instantly, several of his men dismounted, moving past her into the cabin as her aunt wailed in panic. They searched quickly, their movements efficient, their weapons gleaming. Finding nothing, they turned back and muttered to their leader. Still unsatisfied, he pointed toward the shed. Alara's heart leapt into her throat. She dashed forward instinctively, spreading her tiny arms as though her fragile body could form a barrier before the shed door. "No, please, don't hurt him," she cried, her voice breaking. The warriors halted, startled by her sudden cry. Though they did not understand the words, they recognized the desperate tone. The leader strode toward her, towering over her like a giant, his shadow swallowing her whole. He barked a command, and two warriors pushed past her, flinging open the shed door. There, in the dim light, Ahioka stirred, his dark eyes blinking as he tried to rise. The sight of him alive and well drew gasps of relief from the warriors, and a ripple of recognition passed through them. They rushed inside, surrounding him, touching his shoulders, speaking quickly in their tongue. Alara stumbled back, her chest heaving. She thought they might drag him away roughly, but instead their voices softened, almost tender, as if greeting a long-lost child. Ahioka's face lit up with relief, his fear melting as he clutched the hand of one warrior and looked toward the leader with shining eyes. Then, to Alara's astonishment, he pointed at her. The warriors followed his gesture, their eyes now fixed upon the frail little girl standing trembling at the doorway. Ahioka spoke rapidly, his words urgent, his tone full of feeling. Though Alara could not understand, she felt the weight of his gratitude in every syllable. The warriors listened intently, their expressions shifting from suspicion to something more solemn. Finally, the leader stepped forward again. He studied Alara in silence, his gaze piercing as though he could see straight into her soul. Then, with slow dignity, he bowed his head ever so slightly. Alara blinked in disbelief. Was this a gesture of respect? She could not be sure, but her fear began to ease. The leader spoke, and one of the younger warriors translated in broken English. "The boy," he said haltingly, "is son of our chief. He was lost, wounded. We seek him. You save him." Alara gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. The boy she had helped was not just any child, he was the son of a chief, a boy of importance, perhaps even destined to lead his people one day. No wonder 40 warriors had come searching, their urgency driven by more than just duty. She looked at Ahioka, who now smiled weakly at her, his eyes shining with gratitude. The leader continued through his translator, "You show kindness. You protect him. For this, we honor you." Her aunt, still cowering in fear, dared to peek from behind the cabin door, her eyes wide with disbelief. She whispered prayers of thanks that the warriors had not brought violence. Alara, meanwhile, felt her tiny chest swell with something she had never felt before: pride, courage, and a strange sense of belonging in a world far bigger than her little cabin. The warriors lifted Ahioka gently, carrying him with great care. Yet before they left, the leader turned once more to Alara. From his belt he drew a small pendant, carved from bone and strung with beads. He placed it into her hands, closing her fingers tightly around it. "For you," the translator said softly. "Token of our people. You friend now." Tears stung Alara's eyes. She had never received a gift of such meaning, nor such respect. She clutched the pendant as though it were the most precious treasure in the world. The warriors mounted their horses again, carrying Ahioka with them, their formation proud and protective. As they rode away, the thunder of hooves faded into the distance, leaving only dust and silence. Alara stood in the doorway, her heart pounding, her tiny frame trembling with emotions too vast for her young years. She had begun with fear, but now she felt transformed. The settlement, however, would not remain silent for long. News spread quickly that 40 native warriors had come to Alara's cabin, and neighbors whispered wild stories, some claiming she had betrayed them, others that she had struck some strange bargain. Her aunt worried that suspicion would bring trouble, yet Alara held the pendant close to her heart and refused to feel shame. She knew the truth, and Ahioka knew it too. That was enough. Days passed, and life seemed to return to normal, yet Alara could not stop thinking of the boy. She wondered if his ankle had healed, if he was safe, if he remembered her. Sometimes, at night, she touched the pendant and whispered his name to the stars, hoping somehow he could hear. And then, one quiet morning weeks later, she heard the distant sound of hooves once more. Fear prickled through her, but when she looked out, her eyes widened in wonder. It was not 40 warriors this time, only 2, riding calmly, without weapons drawn. Between them rode a familiar figure, his leg bandaged but strong, his smile unmistakable. Ahioka had returned. Her heart leapt with joy as he dismounted and limped toward her. This time, there was no fear, no secrecy. He carried with him a bundle, wrapped in cloth, which he placed in her hands. Inside was food, dried meat, berries, and a small carved doll of wood and feathers. "For you," he said in halting English, repeating the words his people had used. Alara's eyes filled with tears. She hugged the doll to her chest and smiled at him, her tiny voice trembling. Thank you. Though they spoke only a few words, their bond needed no language. They had shared something greater than words, the kind of trust and compassion that bridged the vast divide between two worlds. And so, from that day forward, Alara was no longer just the poor, tiny girl of the settlement. She was the child who had helped the son of a chief, who had faced 40 warriors without breaking, who carried the pendant of friendship as a symbol of courage. Her story whispered through the woods and plains, carried on the wind as a reminder that even the smallest heart, when brave and kind, could change the course of many lives.